That moves us on to public communications. This is the time and place for the general public to address the Fire Protection District and City Council on any item listed or not listed on the agenda. Comments are to be limited to 5 minutes per individual or less as deemed necessary by the chair, depending on the number of persons desiring to speak. Public communications period will not exceed 1 hour prior to the commencement of the business portion of the agenda. We have 10 people who have chosen to come before the council this evening, so we will allow you 5 minutes to make your presentation. When the yellow light comes on, that's about a 1 minute time frame before your comments should be concluded. When the red button goes off, that's the 5 minute time limit.
Hello, Mr. Mayor, Council, and tax-paying citizens of Rancho Cucamonga. My name is Allison Kreider. I am a current volunteer at the animal shelter and have been since 2007. I would just like to thank fired animal shelter employee Jesse Kreider for rescuing that lizard from here. Words should only hold weight when honest intentions are behind them. The 35-page strategic plan for the Rancho Cucamonga Animal Shelter is chock full of buzzwords like stakeholders and best practices and visions of a better tomorrow. Yet it gives zero insight as to why none of it was accomplished during the director's nearly 2-year tenure. Much of what was outlined in the plan should have already been done after Nathan Winograd's recommendations in 2005. They were done so in a half-hearted attempt, and it was in 2009 when a group of longtime volunteers who were tired of seeing animals treated poorly and no outside-of-the-box thinking being utilized to save animals. In fact, the vitriol toward the volunteers by staff, many of who are the same staff that are there today, is what prompted the initial contact of the then Assistant City Manager, John Gillison, and the subsequent special council meetings regarding the state of the shelter. It looked like things were starting to improve, and there were great programs implemented, such as playgroups, kennel enrichment, and adoption videos. Then, when the new director was hired, that all went away, but now she says she has a plan to get it all back. How does that make any sense? The plan continually refers to the vision for tomorrow. Is that because the current director and her leadership team can't deal with today? They might not get it right now, but there will always be tomorrow. Council, the majority of you sat there at the last meeting during the presentation of the plan. I would assume that you also read through it. Did any of you notice that there are no concrete goals that have been set, that everything is listed in 0 to 5 year increments? So does that mean that they don't have to be held accountable for any of this until the 5th year comes around? And then is it going to be like the last 8 years where you're all going to say, well, we tried and we just aren't there yet, but by God, we have a vision. I've seen strategic plans from other municipal facilities that have a real number, for example. They will get the live release rate up to 90% by the end of the 1st year, with a 92% live release rate to 95% by the end of the 3rd year. The director should take an example from places that have real goals that have been set, not just paragraphs discussing what needs to be done. Can you turn that on for me, please? Enrichment programs. They already cut most of them in 2012, and there are none listed here. So what exactly are they striving for? The volunteer program. Thank you. The center has an active volunteer program. Really? Because dog walking, for example, has dropped over 60% in the last year, and that wasn't due to lack of structure. If the center can't manage the few that they have now and retain them, how are they going to manage more than that? Volunteer retention was a concern that was being brought up for years before the current director began, and it only got worse in the 2 years she has been there. Live release and youth rates. No set number of what to achieve. You already overlooked the fact that the youth rate went up in 2012, and it wasn't because of the owner-requested youths, which have been done in previous years. Intake was down, and more animals were euthanized, yet the adoption rate stayed the same. How is that possible? If that doesn't show that the numbers are being fudged, I don't know what does. I could go on through the other categories, and there's nothing concrete here. And do you know why? Because they want to keep it open-ended. Because if they wrote an actual number, that would mean they would have to be accountable for achieving that number. And we've already seen over the last year how accountability and transparency are not a top priority for the shelter management. And for this city council, other than 1, possibly 2 members, seem to be completely okay with that. And that does not bode well for the citizens and the animals. Thank you.
Under Gilbertson, followed by Dana Keithley.
Good evening, Mayor and Councilmen. My name is Andra Gilbertson, and I am a volunteer at the Rancho Shelter. Councilman Spagnuolo, you said at the previous council meeting that no one at the shelter wants to kill an animal. I wish that were true. Yes, we've shown you again and again that it isn't a fact. And here is another tragic example. Baby was a 2.5-year-old, let's see, can I put this on? Baby was a 2.5-year-old pit bull mix who came to the shelter in March. Due to being in receiving and quarantine with kennel cough, she was not walked for the first 3 weeks she was at the shelter. She was even tested and showed no dog aggression, but she was not put into playgroup or paired in the kennels. On May 11th, it was noted that Baby was found by a volunteer out of her kennel and roaming the halls with a bloody nose. This is a dog who was so desperate to get out of her cell that she injured herself to do so. Did the shelter staff do anything to help her? No. They put her back in her concrete cage where she sat for weeks because there were not enough volunteers to walk her. The shelter managed to take a beautiful picture of her, and that's about it. Mind you, this is when the dismissed volunteers were begging at these very meetings to come back to help work with these animals. The next notice was June 14th, where a caretaker noted Baby had cuts on her face, once again desperately trying to get out. What did the experts at the shelter do at this point? They made a note to discuss her behavior and said she had recurring injuries and a poor quality of life. Did they reach out to volunteers to help her? No. Contact fosters? No. Any rescues? No. They waited another 2 weeks to make a note that said she was bloodied up again from trying to pull up the guillotine that is down for cleaning, and that she startles easily and doesn't want to be examined. Again, she had no issues in her initial exam months earlier. She was going downhill on the shelter's watch and these self-proclaimed experts. 3 days later, they tried her in a multi-dog playgroup and note that she was not comfortable and still had poor quality of life. 2 days later, on July 22nd, the shelter staff says she is anxious, nervous, tentative, and that she had not been on any meet and greets. I guess that pretty picture of her wasn't enough to get attention, and she never had a video made, something else we were begging the council to be able to help us to get back and do. The shelter decided to euthanize her for behavior. The life of this beautiful young girl was stolen by the shelter, which watched her deteriorate week after week and did nothing to help her. And in the 5 months she was there, she was only let out of her kennel 8 times. Who in their right mind could consider that the shelter is doing all they can to save these animals? I don't think Cesar Millan would be happy to hear these cases because the shelter sugarcoated everything during his visit in order to keep up their illusion of a progressive shelter. The director fired and discouraged the very people who were helping these animals to have a better quality of life, something they now say they are going to achieve in a new 5-year plan. It is an outright lie and pure propaganda. If they have not done it in these 2 past years, why would anyone believe it will happen in the future with this director and her leadership team? Thank you.
Thank you. Dana Keithley, followed by Jim Moffitt.
Good evening, Council, members of the public. I was also wanting to talk tonight about the Animal Shelter Strategic Plan and how there was still no mention about the goal of achieving a no-kill shelter, nor was it mentioned in the presentation given by the director at the last council meeting, even though that is what you council members set out to do in 2005. There's nothing in the plan saying that the center will achieve a 90 to 95% live placement rate, which is considered to be no-kill today. Why is this completely acceptable with all of you? It has been demonstrated again and again that the current director of the shelter does not fit what the actual job description is, which clearly listed being able to achieve no kill. And the fact that the plan also asks for an operations manager and a community programs coordinator when there are already 5 direct report division supervisors means that she was not qualified to take this job in the first place. But just like how you were all impressed with the 35-page strategic plan at the last meeting and the pretty charts, you were also taken in by the glossy look of Pasadena Humane Society, where Ms. Fincher was the Senior Vice President of Operations before taking the job at Rancho. And if you could please show this on the screen, I'm going to try to get this in as much as I can. This is from the 2011 annual report for Pasadena. And again, this is when Director Fincher was actually Senior Vice President of Operations at Pasadena. And you'll see some really interesting numbers on here. They quote that under the Asilomar statistics, that the placement rate for cats is over 92%, dogs 94%. Of course, you have to look at the fine print to say that this is adoptable dogs and cats, not all dogs and cats that were brought into the Humane Society. It gets interesting. When you actually look at the intake of overall animals received, and when you start to break down the actual number of cats versus dogs, and if you scroll down a little bit to look at the smaller print down here, it actually notes how many cats and dogs were actually euthanized or humanely euthanized. So if we look at the actual examples here, out of 3,480 cats that were actually brought in, they give you the numbers of cats that were put down for placement. But when you actually add up these categories, or then maybe actually subtract the ones of some of our creative accounting, you actually get a kill rate of 54.28% of cats brought in. If you look at the dogs, you get another pretty interesting number. It's not 94.49%. The intake was 4,882 dogs brought in. If again you subtract some of the creative categories of the placeable animals, again the animals that were deemed to be adoptable, versus those sent to rescue, and any of those that were actually RTO'd, when you look at those categories, you actually have a kill rate of 1,221, which adds up to a 25% kill rate for dogs. It's way too easy and completely disingenuous to kill hundreds or thousands of animals by claiming they're unadoptable, and conveniently omitting those dead animals from the kill tallies. How do you hire someone who under their operation has a combined 39.6% euthanasia rate for 2011 at Pasadena Humane to come in to a shelter that has already set a goal of no kill, and you expect them to get an under 10% kill rate? It doesn't make any sense. So either you completely bought into everything that was told, didn't ask any questions, or you knew that there was funny math going on, chose to ignore it, and because the place looks great, Pasadena Humane takes in tons in donations every year. They keep a tight rein on their volunteers, and maybe it was the idea that these things could be brought to Rancho. We'll just hoodwink the citizens so they won't ask questions. Who cares what happens to the animals? We know that the Furry Friends Festival is coming up this Saturday. It's highly touted by the shelter. Big donation event. In 2012, though, the festival brought in more money than ever before, yet it didn't help save more animals. The euthanasia rate was up. Save rate was down. Number of animals sent to rescue down. Volunteers down. How is this considered successful? How did the money raised help save dogs like Baby, whose story we just heard? Money can't take the dogs for walks, can't comfort the cats when they're scared and alone. You know, only volunteers can do that. So really the strategic plan, again, it's just pretty words and propaganda. And we know that this is a David versus Goliath battle, but we know how that story ended. We know that the public is concerned. You know, we've been coming here for 10 months and they know what's going on. Thank you.
Thank you. Jim Moffitt, followed by James McGuire.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor, City Council. You know, I come to these meetings twice a month because it's the only time you have them. But been over a year and a half now, and the same issue comes up every meeting about the animal shelter. The people in Rancho Cucamonga deserve an answer. They should be checked into it. Councilman Spagnola, at the last meeting, chastised Councilman Alexander because he evidently didn't agree, because Councilman, I'm going to embarrass you a little bit, Councilman, because he asked questions and concerns about what was going on and what was shown at the last meeting. I have one concern myself. Why would you put a kiosk in Victoria Gardens? It almost takes an act of Congress now to get an animal out of that animal shelter. And I talked to an awful lot of people. And number two, I think that what happened at the Riding Academy when the two incumbents had the questions before we had the forum, and Councilman Spagnola again chastised Councilman Alexander. Would you put this on the screen for her, please? This is an article from the Daily Bulletin, and Councilman Alexander said it was sad that some people had the questions before the meeting, and the only two that had them were the incumbents, but that's immaterial about that. But Councilman Spagnola's statement to everybody was, to Councilman Alexander, for you to defend those people is despicable. Well, you know, for Councilman Spagnola to stand there and point his fingers and his hand across to Councilman Alexander because he had evidently had some questions and concerns about the animal shelter, I think he owes him a public apology. Number two, this thing on this animal shelter has to be resolved. We have the city manager over there. He acts like he's unconcerned. Now he'll look up. And I think it's time that if Councilman Spagnola is so concerned and says that they're getting a bad result, the animal shelter, then I suggest, Councilman, that you open up at the end of the meeting, that you have an open forum for both sides, the city and the concerns of the volunteers. They say they want more people. They got to hire more people. They need more volunteers. Well, hell, they fired them all. What do you expect? I think it's time that this city address this and get it resolved one way or another. And I'm not taking sides, but I'd sure like to hear both sides. Thank you very much.
Fire. He had to leave. Oh, I'm sorry. Okay. John Lyons, followed by Melissa Boyd.
Mr. Mayor and members of the City Council, my name is John Lyons. I reside in the Etowah area of the city of Rancho Cucamonga. Well, I'm not going to pick on the City Council or the City Manager or the Animal Director. I'm going to talk about my dog Crunch. Oh, Crunch, we had a mouse that we bought a brand new 50-pound bag of dog food for him, and a mouse got into the dog food, and he wouldn't eat the dog food after the mouse got in there. Kind of funny. And anyway, after the second day of not eating, I went down to Del Taco and got him a red burrito, and one of those 50-cent burritos, gave him that. He ate that. And anyway, after a couple of days, I gave him the red burritos for about 2 days. I got the feeling that Crunch didn't like the red burritos, so I ordered him green burritos, and he loves the green burritos. He's so happy after he eats them. And anyway, I found one of my neighbors that took the dog food so they can do whatever they want with it. But you know, I want to talk about, you know, the animal shelter. I told you Crunch has been a guest there many times in the animal shelter. He's getting better. He ran away. The other day he got out. My granddaughter accidentally let him out. And now what I do is I open the back of my pickup truck and the camper shell and the gate, and I just drive around in first gear, and he just jumps in the back of the truck when he sees it. You hear this little thump in the back of the truck, and you know that's him. He's gotten in. So anyway, good little Crunch. He's getting better. He hasn't been a guest of the animal shelter for a while now, so I guess that's a good thing. You know, to me, you know, the animal shelter, what's going on here? These are I called them before the bad karma people. They spent 2 years doing their cloak and dagger campaign inside the animal shelter. And now they've been doing their bullying campaign, they said, for 10 months. I don't know how long it's been going on. But, you know, this campaign they got has financial liability. I mean, the fact is that there's apt to be some liability here. And, I mean, they need to be held accountable for this. Their campaign is designed, it's a vindictive campaign, you know, with a design to it. But anyway, I want to go on. Last week was Rancho Cucamonga High School's homecoming. This next week is going to be Los Osos homecoming. So everybody, I'd like to remind everybody not to drink and drive. You know, lots of exciting things going on in our city right now. I'd like to just talk one thing about old Councilman Holden that came in here earlier today. My house where I lived was taken in 1953 for the freeway, the 710 freeway. And of course, if they're going to get rid of that, the property was never built on. So if they're going to take it back, I'd like to buy it back at the price they paid for it in 1953, you know, and since they didn't use it. But I wanted to talk about 2 weeks ago, actually before the last city council meeting, they had announced on nationwide television about our county. And they said that our San Bernardino County was the #3 largest gang population in the country. I was shocked. I had no idea. I know in Rancho Cucamonga we don't have any problems like that, but I didn't realize the county. I mean, we're like Israel sitting in the middle of the Middle East. You know, this is a really serious problem, and I'd like to encourage we are the premier city of San Bernardino County, and I know we got a gang decree and we got things under control in Rancho Cucamonga, but evidently the rest of the county doesn't have things under control. And I would like to encourage you guys to light a fire under our elected officials in the county to get something done. You know, the pecking order here, the governor is the most powerful man in the state of California. The #2 most powerful person is the sheriff of the county. The third is the president of the board of supervisors. And we need to do something to arresting them isn't working because jails, they can't fill them up, they just let them go. And what we need to do, I think, I'll give you I always have an answer to government, what they ought to do. I think in the areas of where they have a serious gang problem, they ought to put in a dusk to dawn curfew and just arrest these gang members, even though it's a revolving door, just arrest them for being out if they're out after dark and impound their car, whatever they've got. That's one idea. I'd like to see us have gang-free zones where if anybody's collecting welfare, they have a gang member living in their house, they automatically lose it. I'd like to see drug testing for people who are on benefits. We have the most impoverished county in the state of California. We have more people collecting than we actually have working. And I would like to see us drug test these people before they're given benefits. And if they're supposed to be able to work, and if they can't pass the drug test, they don't get benefits. And we got to do something, guys. Well, hopefully you folks can light a fire under our county officials and get them to do something. But this is a countywide problem, not. Anyway, I would encourage that. I thank you guys much, and you have a great weekend. Thank you.
Melissa Boyd. Now moving on to City Manager Staff Report for both the Fire District and City. The following items have no legal publication or posting requirements. First item is presentation of the 2013 mid-year update of the Department's Statistics Report. Mr. Gillison.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor and members of the council. As you're aware, a couple of years ago we started collecting some measurements for each of the different departments, and we do a presentation to you twice a year where we go over those department statistics, and they're intended to give a feel for the workflow and the activity in the different city departments. So with that, I'll turn it over to our management analyst, Donna Finch, from the City Manager's Office to go through this with you. Donna?
Thank you, Mr. Gillison. Good evening, Mayor, City Council members. Tonight I'm going to be presenting a 2013 mid-year update to the Department Statistics Report. As you're aware, this is a new document that the City Manager's Office created at the beginning of this year in 2013 to provide the community and the council with some relevant information about the operations and achievements of all of our 12 city departments. Next up is our City Clerk's Office, and their primary tasks are to prepare public meeting agendas and minutes, process public records requests, and assist with election administration. For the first 6 months of the year, the City Clerk's Office processed 403 City Council agenda items, which was a slight decrease from the previous 6 months at 12.8%. However, they were kept very busy with public records requests and processed 340 requests for the first 6 months of the year, which was a significant increase of 72.6%. And our last department is Animal Care and Services. Primary service categories for this department include pet adoptions, spay-neuter programs, microchipping programs, field services, community outreach, and pet licensing. Overall intake was down 7.1% for dogs and cats. We received 2,476 dogs and cats during this reporting period. We continue to see a very positive live placement rate at 82% for dogs and cats, and we hope to see this grow over the next several months and years with our strategic plan. Field calls were at 3,956, which was a 14.1% increase. And then with our community events, we were able to spay and neuter 54 dogs through Operation Catnip and microchip 181 dogs and cats through our free clinic. I'm sorry, 54 dogs and cats were spayed and neutered through Operation Catnip. That was just cats only, so that was a mistake on that. So 54 cats spayed and neuters and 181 dogs and cats microchipped through the free clinic. So that concludes my report.
Very excellent report. I do have one quick question.
Yes.
You know, I noticed a lot of the increases, decreases. We like to see the decreases that we saw in the police department, that's for sure. Thank you, Chief, and all your people. But I was curious, there was one area of public records request. That's where the public comes in, I assume, and asks for a record request. And I saw like almost 73% increase.
That's correct.
The primary reason for that? Is just
I
a
can look
lot
to
of
our-
people
our
wanting
secretary
information?
for that.
Yes.
Very good. Okay.
Yes.
Okay, very good. All righty. Any other thoughts? Okay, great report.
Thank
Thank you
you.
for that.